Okay, so today's the day. I'm finally going to get started on my ultimate welding table for me. Now, keep in mind that I have limited space here in my small shop, so I need to keep the table to a reasonable size, which is why it's only about 4.5 feet wide by 2.5 feet deep. In the past, I've been using this Strong Hand Tools Nomad table, and it's worked out well for smaller projects. However, as I worked on larger and larger projects, I just needed more surface area to work on than this. Now, this is a great little solution, and I have a link below to it. If you're wanting something small that you can fold up and store away in a corner, and this is a great solution for this. So for a portable table, it's really not bad. I'm also going to, in addition to just being a welding table, I'm also going to integrate storage for my welder. As you can see, I've had this on this separate little mobile cart that does have the tank storage behind it, and the drawers in the front with all of my gear in there typically that I use for welding tools, etc. So I got the idea to integrate the storage for the welder on a slide out drawer, as you'll see, and then also repurpose this little portable cabinet by taking the wheels off of it, the handles, etc., sliding it in the middle. So I'll still retain my drawers and storage capability. I'm also going to build in storage on the back of the cart for my fuel tanks, my gas tanks. This project has evolved from just a portable, larger welding table to an all-inclusive portable welding station that's going to have everything I need and have a little room for growth. So I have all of my steel. I bought in 20-foot sections from my local steel supply house. The steel comes in 20-foot sections, and I don't have to pay them for cut fees to cut it to the dimensions that I want. But if you don't have the ability to haul 20-foot sections or cut it at home, typically a steel shop will cut it to your length. Now, there will usually be an additional charge, a cut fee, but they can do it. And if you don't have the ability to haul long lengths or cut it at home, then that's probably your best solution. So this is a perfect example as to why I need a bigger welding table. This little strong hand, I can't get this frame on here. I lay it on here, definitely hangs off the side, which is okay. But this side, there's nothing to support it. So what I need to do is take this piece of plate steel, put it on here, and I'll clamp this down so that it will make a little makeshift extension while I work on this section. I've had to do this time and time again over the years with various projects, which is why I need finally to build this table to give me a bigger work surface. Okay, I couldn't resist a little mock-up here. I've got the table up, the frame is nice and square, and I've got a few of the slats on here to show you what that's going to look like. Inch and a half apart, so that's going to work out really well. And you know, so you can get a clamp down through here. These are just setting on here right now. I don't have it made, but I just want to show you what that looks like. My battery's running really low on the camera, so real happy with this so far. Of course, it'll sit a little higher because it's going to be on about 6-inch casters up off the ground, and so it's shaping up nicely. At this point, I'm happy to say I now have the frame on wheels here. So I've got my casters mounted, and look how nicely this glides. I'm going to come in here a little closer and we'll take a closer look at it. So as you can see from welding this up, I just brought the 1x2 tubular steel, rectangular steel, into the inside of my legs here. So it just makes a perfect square inside, a rectangle actually, inside of here. Both the top and the bottom are the same way. Looking closely at how I mounted the casters onto the bottoms of the legs, as I just created this flat plate here. I had bored some 3/8-inch holes in to align with the holes in the caster plate. And then I just use 5/16 bolts. These are 5/16 by 3/4 inch long. So if you look at this from the side, the 3/4 inch bolt is just about perfect. You could cut a little bit of this off or go with a 1/2 inch, but 1/2 inch are typically hard to find in this size bolt at your just a local hardware store. And really 3/4 works fine. As you can see, as the caster swivels, it clears, there's not a problem. Now these casters I picked up at my local Ace Hardware. I had originally bought some much bigger, or some true 6-inch wheel casters, and they ended up being extremely tall, plus they didn't have a built-in locking mechanism on it. And to me, that locking mechanism was important, because without it, I was going to have to fabricate some sort of screw legs or screw jacks that would come down and lock the table in place so that it didn't, move around on me while I was working. So these particular ones on the wheels, they say 100 by 36 here. Now I believe that's probably in millimeters, but essentially the wheel is about a 4-inch caster. The wheel's 4 inches across. The overall height, as you can see, is really just under 5.5 inches tall. And what I really like is it has a built-in lock. So when this is on the floor, I can just step on this brake, and not only does it lock the wheel from turning, but it also stops it from pivoting around as well. So it locks it into place. So that worked out really nice. So as far as the thickness, most of my steel is 1/8 inch thick, and I just used 1/8 inch plate. Now I could have used some thicker plate, and normally I would have, but the 1/8 inch was already thicker than what was on my caster itself. So, and there's really very little overhang here, as you can see. So I think this is going to be more than strong enough to support the weight of this table and any work that I'm going to be doing on it. All right, so let's flip it back over, and I want to show you some of the other pieces and parts. So one other point about the casters. I put the 360-degree swivel casters on all 4 legs, like you saw. And the reason I did that is for maneuverability. I have a small shop, and I wanted to be able to roll this in any direction, pivot it around, even spin it around in place. And if I had put fixed casters on one end and swivel on the other, I wouldn't have been able to do that. It would have taken more room to maneuver this table in the same space. So for the supports that go across the frame, that'll be my next step. The bottom ones are actually inset in from this end bar to the center line at 1 foot 2 inches, 14 inches, because I need those to fall underneath as supports for the welding cabinet that I'm going to put in the bottom. On the top, they are only 12 inches or 1 foot set in from this end bar. Now that's from the inside, measuring from the inside of this end bar of the frame to the center line of this bar is 12 inches. So the reason for placing these cross members at the top at 12 inches from the inside of this line to the center line of here is because I wanted them to fall underneath or right in the middle of my tabletop slats so that I could still get under here and clamp without them being in the way. So I'm going to have about 1.5 inch gap, something like that. This is not exact. So I can still get in here with a clamp and be able to clamp something down and get a bite. Had I left it at 1 foot 2 inches, it would have fallen in the middle between 2 slats like that. And as you can see, that would have inhibited my ability to get a clamp in that slot. So the reason I'm using a series of essentially spot welds is that this is only 14 gauge material, and if I were to just run a straight bead, a solid bead across here, I would blow through. Blowing through, I'd melt the steel. There'd be holes and gaps in the joint. It allows the steel to stay cool enough that you don't melt it and you don't blow through. You still get a decent looking weld, and it's also strong enough because I'm getting plenty of penetration into the steel. So I'm just doing that essentially all the way around this joint. Now, this part that is on top, I want this to be flush, so I'll come back later and use my angle grinder to flatten that out. I have the cart flipped over now, or the table flipped over. So now the bottom, instead of coming in a foot, we're going to come in 14 inches or 1 foot 2 inches from this outer edge. Now I use my square. My tubing is 1 inch wide. This combination square is also 1 inch wide. So what I do is come in here, lay this right in the center, and then I can mark here to give me my outside reference points for lining up my tubing. All right, so now at this point we have our layout marks here. So we should be 14 inches. And in this case, it's also 14 inches center to center, and then again 14 inches to there. So we have 14 to the center line, 14 centered on center, then 14 off the end of the frame. So that is where we need to put that. So as per usual, I'm going to don my safety glasses and grab my angle grinder with the flat disc. And all I'm doing is just kind of getting down to the bare metal where I'm going to be welding. And then just double checking my alignment. All that looks great. Check for square. All right. That'll work. So the goal here is just to knock off the weld, get it down. You don't have to grind it perfectly smooth. You just want to get it to where it's not going to cause the slat that's going to be on top of here to be held up off of the surface of the frame. All right, so I've got my pieces of angle. Now this is 1.5 inch by 1.5 inch angle iron. That's an 1/8 inch thick. That's going to be plenty heavy duty enough for what I need to make. And I've just cut miters on the ends of each end of the pieces. This little shelf frame will be 1 foot by 2 foot. When I'm finished, will be the overall dimensions of it. So another reason I'm using this piece of plate steel is to help give me a square angle to line up my edges. And then what I'll do is I'll kind of clamp it down in place and then start to tack weld this. Right now I'm just seeing how the corners fit, how much gap I have in my miters. And overall, that's not too bad. So that's really, now of course, when this is done, it's going to be flipped over so that the flat part is on top. And then I'll cut an actual piece of plate to weld on top of this to make a little pull-out shelf that my Hobart welder will set on. This is just right at 12 inches here. So very happy with that. So I'm going to leave that. In fact, I may go ahead and tack this. What I want to do is just have it just inside, just shy of the edge of the angle iron frame. That way I'll have a place to run a little bead right along the edge. So by pulling it 1/4 on 2 ends, that will leave me 1/8 when I center it. Run it along this outer edge. And what I'll do is when I come back with my cutoff wheel and my angle grinder, I'll cut just inside this line. Okay, so I'm past my mark that I made for my brace, and as you can see, this is starting to get a little floppy here. So what I'm going to do is bring this guy in. And clamp my cutoff piece, workpiece to that. And then as I complete this cut, this won't fall, because this stuff is thin enough that if it were to fall, it could very well bend a corner, and then I just have to hammer it back out. You can do it, but it just creates more work. It's easy just to clamp it. Alright, so that's looking good. Top of here and see how that's looking. As you can see, there's about 1/8 inch reveal around the edge, and what that's going to allow me to do is have a nice place to weld a bead right along there. Then I'll go around and just do a series of short welds. You know, honestly, I don't see any reason to run a full bead all the way around this. I mean, that's essentially 6 feet of weld that I would have to make, 2 down each side, 4, 5, 6 on the ends. And that's just, it's not necessary. This is not a really critical structural piece. It's going to be plenty strong enough. I'll probably weld the corners and then come down about every few inches and put about 1 inch long weld just to, again, hold this in place. So before I attach the plate steel top to the frame of the slide out, I wanted to go ahead and mark where my holes need to be for my drawer slides, as well as go ahead and drill and tap these holes. Okay, so now that we have the frame built, all the holes are drilled and tapped for the drawer slide rails on both sides. There's 3 holes drilled and tapped to 1/4 20. So what I'm going to do is line this up, get our inset around the edge here. So I wanted to build this first so that I could attach my drawer slides to it so that I would have my width correctly when I set that center post in the middle of the table support. Once I have that set and welded up, I'll pull all this back apart and prime this and paint it before final assembly. Okay, so here in the bright sunlight, so I went ahead and put in the 1x1 square tube uprights here in the center. These are 13 inches from the side post inset and have those welded in place. This is a 1/8 inch wall. So these are 1 inch square, 1/8 inch wall. Don't really need anything more than that in the centerpiece. And then you can see here I've got the rails for the drawers also welded in place. Have 2 of those, 1 on each side. And as you saw earlier, I had pre-tapped, drilled and tapped the holes to set that in place. These are 15 inches down from the top, and that's to give me room for my welder to set on here, and if I put the sliders in, I have enough gap for that. So the next thing I'm going to do is to go ahead and test fit the drawer, the tray, mount that in here and see how that works. Okay, so now I've got the drawer fit, the slider drawer, whatever you want to call it. I've just got a few screws in it just to hold it, so it's a little wobbly. But anyway, it works well. It's a little tight toward the back, but you know, that's nice in a way because I don't want it like rolling out as I'm moving the cart around. So this way it's in there nice and snug, and I can still pull it out to get to the welder if I need to and push it back. So one thing I want to show you on the back here, when the drawer, because this drawer or slider is so heavy and with the welder on it, the little stops that were built into the rails, the little metal stops, weren't strong enough to stop with that much momentum going back. So what I did was weld in this little stop bracket here. I just used some scrap pieces of 1/8 inch steel and just put a little flat plate here with a gusset to support it. And now when the drawer goes back, it has a very strong positive stop to keep the drawer from going any further. I felt that was necessary to not put all the strain on those little thin sheet metal stops that were on the slides themselves. All right, so next what I'm fabricating is just a tank holder that will hang off the back of the cart. I wanted it big enough to hold 2 tanks. I only have 1 right now, but I wanted it to be able to have 2 in there just in case I wanted to. This is the base, and what I've done is taken 2 pieces of angle iron. Now I had a bigger 3/16 piece of 2-inch angle iron that I used for the main back support, and then I've cut a couple of brackets and I've ground the back side so it fits there in the angle, and I'll weld those in just like this, one on each end, and then this will be welded to the frame of the cart, so it'll hang just below the main lower frame of the cart. I needed to drop it down in order to get it below the surface of the table. This is 3/16, I wanted it heavy duty. The main angle in the back is 3/16, but the rest I had a lot of 1/8 scrap laying around. In fact, this front piece of angle was 1.5 inches, 1/8 inch, and I had it too short cutoff pieces. So what I did is just piece it together, welded it here, and then cut it to the proper length of 1.5 foot or 18 inches. So it's 18 inches wide, which gives me plenty of room for 2 tanks, and I've made it 8 inches deep, and then of course it's going to be hanging down about 4.5 below. It won't be anywhere near the ground. It should be okay rolling around in the shop. I'm not going to take this cart off-road. So once what I wanted to kind of show you here is, so once these down support brackets are welded in place, which I'm going to do next, I've got a couple of pieces I had cutoffs. They're 12 inches of 1/8 inch by 2 inch wide scrap. So I'm going to come in here and determine my angle, and then make a nice little side bracket like this, an angle bracket that I'll cut to fit in the corner down here, as well as I'll cut the appropriate angle up here and weld it to this upper bracket. And what that's going to do is to help keep it from flexing, if at all, and also it'll serve as an end bracket to keep the tanks from sliding off the edge of the bracket. Okay, so I just placed these out, spaced them as they needed to be, 1.5 inches apart from the end bar, which is not welded on yet. It's just clamped in place. I clamped all 3 of these in place in their perfect position, and then put my 2-inch bar stock. So now I'm going to flip this over. It's just tacked, so I still want to be careful. But as you can see, I just took some 2-inch wide bar stock and and tacked it along here. Welding upside down, it was really hard to get these in the proper location. So I made some very ugly tacks, and what I'm going to do is come back in here and actually weld this up. So the idea is this is going to be my removable section, these 3 panels. And why do I need a removable section? Well, if I ever work on something that's odd shape or L shape that I need to turn down, I am going to have the sliders at the end where I can hang it off the edge, but sometimes you just need a hole in the middle of your table to be able to put stuff through. So that's why I'm making 3 of these as a removable section that I can just pull off and have a hole about this wide here in my table. So you'll notice I'm not running a bead on the inside of this bar on either side. And the reason for that is this is going to set right down over this frame right here, and I'd have to go in and essentially grind most of that weld off anyway. This is going to be plenty strong as it is. Again, there's nothing on here. It's just going to be a pin through here just to hold it in place. So running a full bead on the outside of all 3 of these, it's going to be plenty strong enough. So I just wanted to show you that the pins I'm going to be using, they're just called a hitch pin, and this one happens to be 3/8 inch by 1 5/8. That's a little longer than what I needed, but I wanted to make sure that it cleared. So let me open this up and show you what this looks like. So it just has a pull ring attached to it, and but the quick release part is it has a little detent ball here, and it's tapered. So when I drill a 3/8 inch hole through that plate and also through the upper frame, I'll just be able to snap this pin through and it'll stay. And then it'll hold everything in place. And I'll have one on each side. And then when I'm ready to remove the top, I just reach in, pull this pin out, and then from both sides and just lift the top off. So that's what I have. You can buy these bigger and smaller. For what I'm using it for, 3/8 is plenty big enough. I could have got by with even smaller, but I just thought this was a good size. Just put a bevel on there so the pin will slide in and out easier. The detent ball. Alright, so at this point I'm making a little bracket. I'm going to be reusing the angles brackets here for some of my hangers on the side of the cart. But on one of the ends I wanted to make a piece of angle bracket that runs the full width of the cart like this to hang grinders on, angle grinders and other miscellaneous things. So I've had this piece of scrap 1/8 inch by 1 1/4, and that's going to work out just perfect. It gives me enough width that the grinder hooks on it with the blade and the seat, the foot rests against that. I could have used 2 inch also, but the 1 1/4 is wide enough. So what I've done is I've cut it to the length. I had just enough in this piece of scrap to get these 3 pieces out of it. So this is 24 inches, and these 2 are 3.5. So basically, I don't have a brake, so I couldn't really bend nice crisp angles. So what I'm going to do is put these in here like so, if I can hold it there, show you, and then just tack and then weld this up. And then once I get this nice and square with the 3 pieces, then I will weld this end to the leg of the table. To try to hold this together while I welder up. Just my combination square to make sure I have these everything nice and square. This is not a critical piece, but still. So that's the idea. I'm going to weld it up some more, but that makes the bracket that I will mount to the cart. So there we go. So we have it, have it welded up on the inside and then be down the outside corner. That looks nice. So that's on there now. I'm going to brush. See, when you clean these welds up, they don't look half bad. And that's going to be plenty sturdy enough to do what I'm going to do with it. Okay, and to show you why I wanted this rack on the end here is the angle grinder. You can see there's a little foot under here, and between cutoff wheel, or in this case a flap disc, there's enough room that you can just hang it like that, and it works out well. It doesn't rock. Your width does have to be just enough to engage that foot. So this is 1.25 inches. It works great. 2-inch works great too. So I can just wind up my cords and hang several of them across here. I like that. All right, so next I've taken the drawer out and I've taken the removable section, the 3-piece removable section out, and I've got that primed. Next, what I want to do is to go ahead and start prepping some of the slats for the top. And by prepping, you can see that the pieces that I got from my steel yard, they've got surface rust. And so what I'm going to do is take a steel brush on my angle grinder and then shine these up a little bit, remove this rust. And to do that, instead of using a flap disc and burning all those up, I have this wire wheel attachment. It's called a wire cup. This is a heavier duty one, has the twist in it. It just screws directly onto your angle grinder. So I'm going to go with that, and then I do clamp them down one at a time and then go over these. I'm not going to show you all of these. I'm just going to start and do a couple, and then we'll fast forward. Okay, and that's good enough. Again, I'm trying to make it look new, just trying to get that surface rust off there. And I'll take a file and clean up the inside edge of these as I move through here. Now, this is certainly not necessary, but you can see on the edges where these were cut off, there's some sharp burrs on the inside. It's smooth on the outside edge, but I want to go ahead and clean that up on the inside just because it looks good. Plus, I might run my hand in here and I don't want to get cut later on. So that just helps to clean that edge up so that it's not so sharp. Okay, so I'm not going to bore you with the details of cleaning every one of these, preparing them. So I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of these off camera, and then we'll get to tacking these in place. Okay, so at this point, probably noticed I got the frame kind of primed. I'm still working on adding a few parts to it, but I've got it on a cart and got the wheels off of it in order to start working on painting and priming. But I finally got my steel to do my slider, at what I call the slider, that mounts up underneath the table and allows me to have 2 slats on each end to slide out. Now in order to do that, what I'm using is, I'm using 1 1/4 square tubing, 1/8 inch wall, and then I also have some extra 1 inch tubing, also 1/8 inch wall. Now on these are going to slide inside of this 1 1/4 inch tubing. I'm probably going to have to do some grinding to make up for the weld that's inside this. The tolerances are a little tight. But on one side I have mounted down here. You can see that it's welded into the frame already. This is the other side, and what I'm doing is I'm milling a 3/8 inch slot across here. And I've got one slot milled, and I'm going to show you how I mill the other side. Now, one thing before I do that, I will say that if you don't have a milling machine or you don't know anybody that can mill this slot for you, what you can do is drill the holes like I have here, and then take your angle grinder with a cutoff wheel and then just go along here. Now, it's not going to be as perfect as with a milling machine, but you can still get the job done, and then come back in with a file or grinder and clean it up a little bit. It's not critical that this piece be perfectly 3/8 inch wide across the whole thing. Again, its sole purpose is just to provide a channel for this bolt to slide in to provide stops at either end. So now that I've got my rail with my milled slot in it, the idea is that this is one of the slider arms that comes out. Now you'll notice it's shiny because I had to take a flat disc and grinder and kind of grind this down to where it would fit smoothly inside this tube. Additionally, since there's a welded seam inside this tube, I had to take one side and really round off the edge. I don't know if you can see it in here, but I had to get it kind of thin on this one edge here so that it would pass that welded seam on the inside. Regardless, it's all working pretty well now. So I've matched up because I've got them ground to fit. So I've labeled this one right rear and up, right rear and up. And then what I did was I put it inside the slider and then marked where a hole should be. So I drilled a number 7 hole and tapped this for a 1/4 20, and then I'm going to use these small 1/4 inch screws. Now this one's got a longer shank on it here. You could get by with shorter, but what I wanted was a smooth surface to rub against this. Down here you'll notice where the hole is, centered inside the slot, and then just by threading in my 1/4 20 bolt, it goes all the way down and seats, and then it acts as a stop, and that's exactly what I wanted. So when I pull this out, I don't have to worry about it coming out of the rails, so it'll act as a stop, and then on the way back it'll also stop, leaving me 3 inches to center line out here, and that will allow me to mount this into the center of my end slat. nearing the home stretch, and I'm glad of it because this has been a lot of work. But it's turning out really nice, so I'm happy about that. There's really only one main fabrication piece that I need to do, and that is to finish welding up these slider arms that I've created with these upright pieces, like so. Now I've initially cut these on center about 2 1/4 inches, giving it a little slack because I can always grind it down. But how this is going to work is to just take this miter piece and put it on here like so, and then weld that up. But what this is going to do is there's going to be one more slat on each end that is going to sit like that roughly, and then it's going to be able to slide in and out with this arm to give me an expandable work surface. Alright, so what I'm doing here is again being able to move the sliders in and out, have this piece clamped, and then I want to take my mitered piece of upright, and that's going to sit in here, and that way I can bring it in and get it adjusted to where it needs to be. Okay, so I'm going to use one of my smaller magnets to help hold this in place. So I'm going to get that set up here on this top side and bring this out, let it hold that. And that is about where it needs to be. Getting that set, okay, and now I'm going to tighten up my clamps here, snug them up. Alright, so I have it set the way I want to, in and out, so the gap is set. So now it's just a matter of getting this guy in here where it needs to be and checking my square on top here. So this is what it looks like, the slider. I'm going to turn upside down up here and weld this a little bit better. At this point I'm finished painting, I'm finished with the welding and cutting and grinding, and I'm going to start the final assembly process. So the idea for this design came to me over a couple of years of thinking about what I would like to have in a welding table. I watched many different YouTube videos. There's a lot of good ones out there, people, a lot of different designs. And if I'm honest, this table is a hybrid of all the different tables I saw being built on YouTube. And what I did is I took the bits and pieces that I liked about each one and really aggregated it into one table that was what I felt was the perfect table for me. So cost is always an issue that people don't always talk about. Now, of course, I already had the cabinet and I had the welder and I repurposed some parts to make this. But in the steel and the casters and everything that I bought to build this table, I have about $350 in it. Now that's not too bad considering that some of the other tables out there are very, very expensive if you go to buy them. Now, you may not need all the features in this table and you can get by with less money. But I just want to give you a rough idea of what I have into building this table. So let's go ahead and, I'm going to go ahead and pull the card out and show you the slide outs and give you some specs on it. So one of the features that I liked about this, and the reason I put 4 swiveling casters on the wheels is so that I could spin this thing around in place. As you can see, I have limited room, and so maneuverability was important to me. So once I have it where I want it, I can lock it in place and work on it. Now, the work surface, the total work surface right now is, in its closed configuration, is 4 foot 9 inches, 57 inches. So you saw me building these sliders. So I can expand it from my 4 foot 9 inch length just simply by pulling these arms out. Now it goes from 4 foot 9 inches all the way out to 7 foot 9 inches. So that lets me gain 3 feet of additional table length, just that easy. So another key feature of this table is this removable section. Actually, these 3 slats are a removable section. Now I have those I have the quick release hitch pins that are in here. So by removing the 2 hitch pins, I can now pick up this center section, or those 3 slats, and move them out of the way. And what that does is gives me an open area that I can put awkwardly shaped pieces down through it. I don't know how many of you guys have ever been welding and trying to maneuver a piece around on a table and thought, well, I wish I just had a big hole in my table right here. Well, that's what this is for. Now honestly, I'm not going to use it that often, but since I was fabricating the table, I thought I would go ahead and make it have this feature. Now you also saw that I repurposed an old welding cabinet cart that I had bought at Northern Tool many years ago. It's worked out well, but it works much better now that it's part of this bigger table. And now I can get in here and get to my tools as needed. So it gives me a convenient place to store all my gear in the table. Another feature was the slide out tray that I put my welder on. And there was really no major reason to have a slide out tray other than I thought it would be cool to build it. But the nice thing is that if I ever need to work on it or to do anything to it, it makes it much more accessible to pull the welder out like this to be able to get to it. I also repurposed 2 of the hooks that were on the old cart. I just drilled and tapped the 6mm bolt that was in the cart into the frame. And so it gives me a nice place, as I had before, to hang my leads. And as you can see, there's also one here on the back to hang the power cord when it's not in use. Now on the back here, I fabricated the tray at the bottom. One thing I can already see that I wished I had done differently is I think I'm going to go back and put a piece of flat plate in the bottom. With the rounded bottom of the tanks, some tanks, it's awkward for it to fit. Now this one's in there and it's nice and secure, so I'm not too worried about it. But that may have been an enhancement that I can do later. And I've gone on my cart from having the capacity to hold 1 tank to being able to hold 2 now. On this end of the cart, You saw me fabricate this bracket that I mounted here, and my primary purpose was to be able to hang my angle grinder on it, or multiple angle grinders. But it's also proven to be handy for just hanging miscellaneous clamps on the ends as well. Additionally, I just have a couple of clamps hanging off the ends of some of the rails just to keep them handy. So I know this video was very long, and I appreciate it if you've made it this far. But for those of you who want to see all the detail on how to build this table, I want to just lump it all in one video and not spread it out over many parts. Now there is a shorter version, as I listed at the beginning of the video. If you want to see just the build, it takes place over 20 minutes and it's no talking, it's just showing you the build. There's a link to that video as well. So overall, I am very happy with this cart so far. As I use it and work with it, I'm sure I'll come up with new ideas and modifications to it. And as I do, I'll make some videos showing you those updates to the welding table. This is Tim Two Wheels. I hope you enjoyed this video. And as always, thank you so much for watching.